Hello, this is Stephanie Simpson, the Executive Director of the Bleeding Disorder Foundation of Washington, and I'm excited to share with you some of our legislative efforts for 2019 legislative session. Some of you will be joining us at our Advocacy Day. This is going to provide you some information on what we will be asking the elected officials to support while we are there. And for those of you that hope to connect on your own with your elected officials over the upcoming months, this is a video that will allow you to learn about the pieces of legislation that you can speak to them about and to educate yourselves a little bit about what we're working on here in the BDFW. So I'm just going to take a few moments. I'm going to go through each piece of legislation. There is going to be another document that you could look at too that will provide links so that you can actually go and read the pieces of legislation. You can follow along with how the legislation is progressing. And of course, if you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to the BDFW through email, Facebook, Instagram, any sort of means that works best for you. We always are happy to help. And if you aren't able to join us on our lobby day and you do want to go down and work with your elected official, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to help you make meetings, provide documentation, and anything to make that advocacy effort more enjoyable. Because those of you that know me know I love advocacy and making sure that all patients in Washington with bleeding disorders have excellent care and access to the medicines that they want. So let's go ahead and dive into the legislation that the BDFW is currently advocating for. The first piece of legislation I'm super excited about. The BDFW has been working on it for about a year, and we are leading the effort on this bill with our lobbyist that the BDFW board approves. So this is the Emerging Therapies Working Group. It is House Bill 1869. So that's House Bill 1869, and it's to establish an Emerging Therapies Work Group. So the reason this came about is because hemophilia is set to have gene therapy approved likely by 2020, but it's going to be very expensive, as are emerging therapies, the emerging therapies that were recently approved and then potential emerging therapies coming down the pipeline. And these therapies are not only for hemophilia, so they can't just be carved out. So the foundation wanted to make sure that all patients who are likely to be eligible for really expensive treatments, including gene therapy, that the states start talking about how they are going to provide these therapies to patients, how they'll go through that thought process, and then also how they're going to pay for them. So that when they do become available, that there isn't a patient who is denied access. And then as patients are aware of how the state will look at these opportunities, then we will be able to, patients will know whether or not it truly is going to be an option for them. So this piece of legislation brings together a series of different individuals to work with the state to start talking about how they're going to approach covering and providing these therapies for patients. It will be one of the first pieces of legislation of its kind to really look at how we're going to provide for future treatments. And this is that opportunity for the BDFW to start providing some advocacy work for other groups outside of hemophilia. Of course, this definitely benefits bleeding disorder patients, but allows us to make sure that we're providing good healthcare policy for all of those that have expensive treatments. And the state defines an emerging treatment as anything over $100,000 a year. So that's kind of where that framework sits in. So if you're meeting with an elected official about this bill, and if you were trying to incorporate your own story, you would want to share about how you are hopeful that maybe you will have access to these treatments, that a treatment could be presented to you, how that might allow you maybe to come off of disability, or how it provides fewer bleeds, maybe a better treatment option, less invasive, or if it is specifically gene therapy, maybe looking at it as potentially a cure, really changing the lives for folks and what it would look like if you didn't have your condition or if you had a much milder form of your condition, and how that would allow you to be a more contributing member of society and live the life that you are really looking to live. So that is, again, the House Bill 1863, and that's the Emerging Therapies Bill. The next piece of legislation that the BDFW is actively working on is the patient protections under the Affordable Health Care Act, and that has two different titles. That's House Bill 1870 and Senate Bill 5805. And the title of that bill is Making State Law Consistent with Selected Federal Consumer Protections in the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. So this bill is really important to folks with any sort of medical condition, but specifically hemophilia. As many of you are aware, the Health ACA really put into protection some framework that allows patients with expensive conditions such as hemophilia or any of our bleeding disorders, so that they know they can continually get care from year to year. So these protections include pre-existing conditions, lifetime caps, and annual caps. So if you were going to meet with an elected official, you would want to talk about how those benefit you. And really what this bill is, takes those federal components and puts them into state law. So if there were some issues in trying to repeal the federal law, or those became not as active and as protective for patients, that this piece of legislation would help patients in Washington make sure that they had those protections moving forward. Again, being the pre-existing conditions, the lifetime caps, the annual caps, all components that are extremely important for those with bleeding disorders, and really important for anyone with any chronic condition and those with more expensive conditions, definitely. So those are the kinds of things that we're working on that, and what you would want to speak to is just kind of really, and if you have been around for a while, and if you were around before the healthcare law passed, talking about what life was like that before is really, really important for elected officials to remember, because it's amazing how quickly we can forget how families were really living on the verge without those protections. And then the third piece of legislation that we're working on is the public option, or the standardized benefit plan. It is House Bill 1523 and Senate Bill 5526. And so this increases the availability of quality, affordable healthcare in the individual market. So this is folks that are on the exchange. The exchange is great because it provides an option for patients who really want to start their own business, or maybe they're growing out of being able to be on Medicaid, allows them to get insurance. But there's still some things that need to be fixed with that. Even when ACA was approved, we knew that there was components that needed to be fixed. And so while the federal government kind of figures out how to do that on their own, the states kind of stepped in and said, what do we need to make sure that Washington patients have the healthiest individual market available to them? So the BDFW is actually a part of a working group to look at out-of-pocket costs. This was a couple of years ago. I sat and participated on that. And what we found out there is that what we thought that the patients and some of the groups such as doctors and hospitals, as well as the insurance companies, what we could do is look at a standardized option plan. And that means that it's a little more transparent. It's trying to spread out the cost more. Ultimately, what we're looking at is to reduce that premium and that out-of-pocket cost. Ideally, maybe being able to look at an option where an out-of-pocket cost wouldn't be due all at January 1. Then maybe it would be due throughout the year, making it a more manageable expense for any family, but especially a family who has really high medical costs and recurring medical costs. Some folks who have a high medical cost maybe only have it for a year or two. So while it's definitely a financial burden, it's not something that cripples the family, such as a recurring cost, such as those folks with bleeding disorders, where it's every January 1, no matter what, that out-of-pocket cost is due. So this is a really exciting piece of legislation. It's really progressive. It is different than some forms of public option. So if you want to get into the details of it, I can find some of that for you. What I really focus on is that if you were meeting with an elected, you could talk about how this would reduce the deductible for patients and reduce the out-of-pocket costs, and create a more transparent plan that would allow patients to navigate their health insurance. And so that's why the BDFW is really behind this piece of legislation, so that it can provide that. I've always been a real advocate that the exchange allows our patients to outgrow being on Medicaid and allows them to work more. And so that's why we really advocate strongly for healthy plans on the exchange. So those are the three main pieces of legislation that we're working on. Again, you can go and look at the details of these bills. You can read some more information on them. And then, of course, you can reach out to us. Another great piece of information that we have is we also have the video that helps prepare folks on how to meet with your elected officials. And I'll go ahead and put together a briefer one on that as well. And just remember that these are folks who want to hear your story. They need to be able to attach to someone who does have really high health costs, and that the system needs to be tweaked a little bit more for them so that we can really provide viable insurance options and therefore creating a really healthy state for everyone who lives here. So I look forward to talking with you in the future, and I will see you soon. Thank you.